Tom Swarbrick on LBC.
10 to 6, Friday evening. Tom Swarbrick on LBC means one thing. You might not be able to get to the States yourself, given the problems at Heathrow tonight, but we can bring the States to you. Thanks to Simon Marks. American Week.
Tom, it gives me no pleasure to say it, but when historians finally come to grips with the collapse of American democracy, they may identify last Saturday as the moment when it happened. It was, as things often are in Trump's America, marked by a dramatic video with threatening images and eerie music. The arrival of 238 Venezuelans deported from the US to El Salvador was trumpeted by El Salvador's populist president, a big fan of Donald Trump's. His government is being paid to incarcerate the Venezuelans, and he made sure the deportees received a rough reception upon landing. The deportees were shackled, manhandled, forcibly shorn of their hair, dressed in gym shorts and cotton vests, and marched away, their heads forced downwards by heavily armed El Salvadorian anti-terrorist forces. They will now be held for at least a year in a notorious terrorist detention facility in which they will be forced to do hard labour. And yet, it is not clear that any of them has been convicted of any crime, and the planes that conveyed them out of the United States were ordered to be grounded by a judge last Saturday, who, sensing that a human rights outrage was taking place, also ordered any planes already in the air to turn around in mid-flight and return the deportees to American shores. The Trump administration ignored the court, insisting the deportees were the worst of the worst, members of a Venezuelan criminal gang called Tren de Aragua. Time was apparently of the essence in removing them from the United States.
The president's designation of Tren de Aragua as a foreign terrorist organization and as an alien enemy are part of his inherent plenary authority.
Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff and zealous architect of Trump's mass deportations, telling CNN that the courts have no role to play in tying Donald Trump's hands on this matter or on a host of others.
How are you going to expel illegal alien invaders from our country who are raping little girls, who are murdering little girls, if each and every deportation has to be adjudicated in a district court judge?
Now, let's just hold on a minute and back up. As you heard there, the White House contends that the Venezuelans are terrorists, murderers and rapists. President Trump reached back to the 18th century to find a law, the Alien Enemies Act, that says in a time of war, the commander-in-chief has the right to repel an invading force by military means. But we don't know who any of the Venezuelan deportees are. The White House won't release their names, calling it a national security issue. So we don't know that any of them are convicted terrorists, murderers and rapists. And in El Salvador, they are again all now being denied any recourse to the courts. Numerous family members who have caught video glimpses of their loved ones, now disappeared by America's authoritarian regime, into El Salvador's for-profit gulag, say some of the deportees had nothing to do with Tren de Aragua. The district court judge, who has spent all week trying to get to the bottom of it, has faced the disdain and contempt of White House lawyers in court and personal slurs and hate directed at him and his family online.
We have judges who are acting as partisan activists from the bench. They are trying to dictate policy from the President of the United States.
That's White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. This is Trump's border czar, the man in charge of the deportation program, Tom Homan.
I wake up every morning loving my job because I work for the greatest president in the history of my life, and we're going to make this country safe again. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
I don't care what the judges think. In 7 words, a new mantra for the Trump administration and the death knell for American democracy.
We have rogue judges that are destroying our country.
The president this week talking to one of his fans, Laura Ingraham of the Fox News channel, even after he had clearly defied the judge's court order banning last weekend's deportations. She asked him this.
Are there circumstances where you would defy a court order?
I never did defy a court order.
And you wouldn't in the future?
No, you can't do that. However, we have bad judges. We have very bad judges. And I think at a certain point, you have to start looking at what do you do when you have a rogue judge? The judge that we're talking about, he's a lunatic.
On social media, the president proposed impeaching judges who rule against him. It worried John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, so much that he put out an unprecedented rebuke of the suggestion that the judiciary, the third co-equal branch of government here alongside the president and Congress, should face impeachment instead of going through the normal appeals processes. Those processes, of course, can lead to final decisions being taken by the Supreme Court. It's called the Supreme Court for a reason, except this president thinks his powers should be supreme in running the country. It is fair to ask, as Trump dismantles American democracy brick by brick, what has happened to his opponents, the Democrats?
I think you caved. I think you and 9 other Democrats caved. I don't think you showed the fight that this party needs right now.
Sonny Hostin, one of the hosts of ABC's The View, this country's equivalent of ITV's Loose Women, going after the Democrats' leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. Last weekend, he and those 9 other Democrats sparked fury by voting with Republicans to keep the government open. They supported a funding bill that cuts domestic public spending by $13 billion and puts some social safety net programs at risk.
No one wants to fight more than me, and no one fights more than me. And we are fighting. We're going to fight every day. We're going to stick it to them and fight smart and win.
But Senator Schumer and the other Democrats in Congress appear not to have read the mood of the party's grassroots. Fury by Democrat supporters over the failure of the party's elected lawmakers to confront Trump's authoritarianism is now so intense that Senator Schumer decided to abandon a book tour, citing security concerns. Many Democrat lawmakers are heeding the advice of veteran party strategist James Carville. In the New York Times last month, he urged the party to roll over and play dead, allow the Republicans to crumble and make the American people miss us, he advised. But by the time the Americans get another chance to vote in midterm elections next year or another presidential election in 2028, it may be too late for all that.
President Trump will run and win again in 2028.
The president's political advisor, Steve Bannon, challenged by Chris Cuomo on News Nation TV this week about how Trump can possibly seek a third term.
You know he's term limited. How do you think he gets another term?
We're working on it. I think we'll have a couple of alternatives, let's say that.
Let's be clear, Trump only gets a third term if the US Constitution is either suspended and elections are cancelled, or if it just gets completely ignored. So there are a couple of alternatives for you right there. Whatever happens next year, or in 2028, one iconic broadcasting organisation will not be around to report it.
This is the Voice of America, Washington, D.C., signing on.
VOA, the Voice of America, and its Yankee Doodle theme music had been broadcasting continuously since 1942, until Trump's revolutionary government silenced it last weekend. VOA was created to combat Nazi propaganda.
Daily at this time, we shall speak to you about America and the war. The news may be good or bad. We shall tell you the truth.
That was not an idle boast. For the past 83 years, VOA has been required by law to tell all sides of every story and not to be an American propaganda outlet. Its sister institutions, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, and broadcasts targeting the Middle East and Cuba were also silenced last weekend. The Trump administration made shameless, entirely unsubstantiated claims that they were all engaged in the dissemination of far-left radical propaganda. They weren't, and mired in corruption, an assertion for which absolutely no proof was provided. Historically, VOA played a huge role boosting America's influence globally through the use of classic soft power.
Time for jazz. Willis Conover in Washington, D.C. with the Voice of America Jazz Hour.
Jazz largely owed its popularity in Europe and elsewhere to Willis Conover. For 40 years, his programme introduced it to millions of eager fans. By the 1950s, he was considered one of the most famous Americans of the era. He viewed jazz, with its African-American roots, as a genre that could promote racial equality, and its free form as an essential reflection of democracy.
The music of jazz parallels the freedom that we have in America.
With the shutdown of his beloved VOA by cultural and political vandals led by President Donald Trump, he would not, Tom, recognise the country today.
From Washington, D.C., Simon Marks, American Week.